Equals November 30th, 1939. General Ivan Korolev stood in his dimly lit office in Leningrad as the telegram arrived, sealed with the emblem of the People's Commissariat of Defense. The order was simple and absolute: advance into Finland and crush all resistance. Snowflakes brushed against the frosted windowpane, and he could feel the chill of inevitability creeping in. Stalin's voice still echoed from the last meeting. Finland is a pebble in the road to our security. Korolev whispered to his aide, "Comrade, the men are not ready for winter warfare." The aide averted his gaze, fearful of such honesty. Outside, tanks rumbled northward, engines groaning in the bitter cold. The Red Army, freshly scarred by Stalin's purges, moved with mechanical obedience, not conviction. Korolev exhaled a shaky breath. He knew they were marching into the unknown, into white storms and deeper moral fog.
The Red Army columns stretched like a blood-red serpent through the white void of Karelia. Korolev rode in a staff car, its engine growling under layers of frost. Endless forests clawed at the gray sky, snow thick enough to swallow artillery wheels. Soldiers shivered in threadbare coats, their breath rising like ghosts. One lieutenant murmured, "The Finns will melt before our guns," but even his words carried doubt. By nightfall, the first problems appeared. Trucks stalled, maps proved useless, radios failed in the cold. Overhead, no planes appeared, their engines froze solid on the airfields. Korolev watched his men stumble through knee-deep snow. He thought of Napoleon's Grand Army, another invader who underestimated winter. The general tightened his scarf, realizing Stalin's hubris had already become theirs. The frost was not just an enemy, it was a silent executioner.
By early December, Korolev's divisions reached the Mannerheim Line, a fortress carved into frozen rock and pine. Finnish machine guns waited, silent as wolves beneath snow-draped camouflage. The first Soviet assault began at dawn. Rockets screamed, shells burst, yet when the smoke cleared, the line still stood untouched. The Finns never charged, they vanished, then reappeared with terrifying precision. Whole platoons disappeared into forest traps. "How do they move so fast?" shouted Captain Petrov, his voice cracking through rifle fire. Korolev could barely answer. Through binoculars, he saw a white-clad sniper drop 3 advancing soldiers with mechanical calm. Blood stained the snow like spilled paint. The general clenched his fists. The enemy was invisible, the cold eternal. Above the chaos, a single thought circled in his mind. Stalin had promised an easy victory. All he delivered was a white graveyard.
Deep in the Karelian wilderness, snow muffled every sound except the crunch of boots and the occasional cry of a raven. Korolev's column advanced between 2 ridgelines when the ambush struck. White figures rose from the trees, unleashing crossfire from unseen positions. Panic spread like wildfire. "Get down!" Korolev shouted, diving behind a frozen log as bullets shredded branches overhead. Soviet tanks, immobile in the snow, burned like iron pyres. Finnish ski troops darted swiftly, their movements ghost-like. Moments stretched into hours of terror. By dusk, silence fell once more, broken only by the crackle of flames and distant moans. Korolev surveyed the charred remains of his unit, 70% gone. He pressed his gloved hands into the snow, crimson seeping through. This was no campaign. It was punishment, paid in blood for the arrogance of their leaders.
December nights grew longer, darker, indifference mixing with despair. Inside a shattered farmhouse turned command post, Korolev gathered his surviving officers. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow from exhaustion. "Comrades," he said quietly, "we have lost 2 divisions. Supplies are vanished. Morale gone." Captain Petrov spat into the corner. "And still Moscow demands victory." A radio crackled, an order from Meretskov's headquarters demanding immediate renewal of attacks.
Korolev's voice hardened. "We cannot obey fantasy." But fantasy ruled from the Kremlin. Outside, the moan of wind carried ghosts of the fallen. The purges had stripped the army of wisdom. Brave men died for silence. Korolev scribbled a report that would never reach Stalin's desk and muttered, "This war is eating its children." Snow began to fall again, soft, endless, indifferent.
Equals January 1940. The temperature had dropped below -40. Korolev walked among frozen bodies littering the road, faces locked in expressions of disbelief. Rifles protruded from snowdrifts like forgotten spears. He paused beside a young conscript, 19 at most, frozen while clutching his rifle to his chest. The general removed his fur hat and bowed his head. "Forgive us," he whispered to the motionless form. The frostbite consumed entire companies. Rations were slabs of ice. Vodka froze in the bottle. Officials in Moscow called it temporary setbacks, but here in the white desolation truth screamed in silence. When a survivor muttered, "We cannot win," Korolev didn't correct him. For the first time he agreed. Above them the northern lights twisted, a cruel beauty over a dying army.
Equals a telegram arrived mid-January. Leningrad ordered renewed offensive drives, political commands disguised as strategy. Korolev stared at the ciphered words, his vision blurring with fatigue. Rumors whispered through the ranks. Generals replaced, executed, vanished. The shadow of Bria hung like a noose around every officer's neck. "If we retreat, they shoot us. If we advance, they freeze us," a sergeant murmured bitterly. Korolev said nothing. There was no safe answer. At night, he wrote in his private notebook, hidden inside his greatcoat. "History will not remember the men who froze here. It will remember lies." Outside, sleigh bells echoed faintly, not of joy, but ghostly mockery. Leningrad's lights were far away now, another world untouched by this white hell.
Equals late January brought new artillery, reinforcements, and the grim determination of survival. Korolev coordinated an assault on the Suomussalmi front. This time, the Red Army moved with caution, tanks flanked by infantry, lessons carved in frost and blood. The bombardment began with thunderous precision. Shells arced across frozen lakes, shattering ice and fortification alike. For a brief moment, victory felt tangible. "Forward!" Korolev roared, voice echoing over the tumult. The Finns fought back fiercely, but now the Soviets adapted, no longer blind to the terrain. Hours later, as smoke lifted, positions once impregnable were taken. Yet the cost was immense. Bodies lay strewn amid shattered birch trees. The general stood by a crater, numb. Triumph in war, he realized, was often a mirage drawn in firelight and tears.
Equals February's thaw began too late for mercy. Soviet marches grew steady again, pushing toward the southern front. Korolev's troops crossed bombed villages, ghost towns where only chimneys stood. Artillery echoed across the Gulf of Finland. Yet even as advances continued, whispers in Moscow turned the narrative. Stalin demanded a victory spectacle. Korolev knew the truth. The cost was grotesque. "General," an adjutant told him, "High Command says the Finns are asking for talks." Korolev exhaled. Relief mixed with dread. He thought of the countless names frozen into the soil behind them. Snow melted around their graves now, revealing spent shells and silence. The war was ending, but it had already consumed its meaning. Korolev watched the horizon, burnt gold under a fading sun. Peace would come, but not forgiveness.
Equals March 13, 1940, the war ended. The Moscow Peace Treaty granted Stalin territory but no glory. Korolev returned to Leningrad under gray skies, greeted not by parades but silence. Files were sealed, failures erased. In private reports, he noted 30,000 Soviet dead, perhaps more. Yet propaganda paraded it as triumph. He stared out over the Neva River, the thawing ice drifting like ghosts of comrades lost. A clerk asked, "Was it worth it, Comrade General?" Korolev said nothing. Words could not measure the cold, nor the arrogance that had sent them north. In his notebook, he wrote one final line: "We conquered land but lost our soul." The Winter War was over, but its lessons would haunt every campaign to come. Stalin had miscalculated, twice, against Finland and against truth.